Well, thank you so much for making the time to talk with us today. You just finished up a roundtable discussion on the role of autonomous technology with commercial trucks, and I know that's a priority for you and something you're interested in. What were your takeaways from that conversation today?
Well, the biggest thing is the technology is coming fast, and industry isn't necessarily going to wait for the government to start implementing. You're starting to see this experiments and things happening all over the country. It's exciting what's happening, but we also have to be mindful, in terms of the federal government, that we're starting to get this patchwork of laws and regulations all over the country, every state having different ones. We're going to have to come up with a uniform set of standards so that we can advance this technology. And then we obviously have some labor issues too. There are some organizations that are concerned about the displacement of folks, as autonomous vehicles come in. I still think that's a long ways down the road before we ever get to the point where there will be no driver in a vehicle, but it's still, something that concerns folks.
Well, and so what do you think are the legislative fixes or opportunities that this technology offers? Well,
the biggest thing, obviously, in terms of legislation and how we deal with it is what I mentioned earlier, and that is having a uniform set of standards. We also have to think about, too, the technology and what it needs to be able to be deployed. In the way that we construct roads and the way that we are building roads or resurfacing roads, we may need to start looking at technology that needs to be implanted or part of the road itself so that the technology can read, those cues, or even painting, signage, whatever it takes to allow those vehicles to be able to recognize those things. And then obviously, as I mentioned earlier, it has to be uniform across the country. So we need to be thinking about all of this stuff. You hate to build a road and then all of a sudden find out that, well, we need to go back in and implement these certain things so that autonomous vehicles, or at least vehicles that take over a lot of the monotony of driving, those cues that they need, we don't want to have to go back in and dig up the road and start all over again.
Right. Do you think this is a priority for the committee for the next year or so?
It is. And the committee's jurisdiction is commercial vehicles as opposed to passenger vehicles, which is another jurisdiction. But I think it's going to be a huge priority. It's coming fast. We need to be proactive about it and get it very involved with it. And it's huge opportunities, whether it's fuel savings or efficiency, traffic efficiency. There's a variety of things out there that the technology brings that's going to solve some problems as well.
Right. Well, I know you mentioned in the past that this is something that you're eager to start tackling, and that it's something that you'd like to consider doing if you were to become chairman. I know that's something that you're starting to try to make the case for, and I wondered if you want to talk a little bit about what you see for yourself in a role as chairman and what you'd like to do, and how you're talking to your colleagues about what differences you think you could make.
Well, I am talking to the colleagues. We still have a little ways out. We still have to be mindful of the work that the committee is doing right now, and Chairman Schuster is working on. He's still got another year in that seat. But we are taking a look at the priorities and what we need to be looking at, and things that we aren't able to accomplish, for instance, this year. And there's a lot of stuff out there. One of the biggest things facing us is the Highway Trust Fund. It goes insolvent in 2020. Before the next highway bill. We've got to solve that issue, how we move forward, what that looks like. And everything's on the table. Gas tax, do we stick with that, which is very regressive because we have more and more vehicles on the road that don't use gas or are getting more and more efficient. Do we pivot to something like vehicle miles traveled? How do we implement that? There's concerns with it, but we have to figure out how to continue to make the trust fund solvent, and make sure there's plenty of dollars in there to pay for roads and bridges. And the nice thing about transportation is we still have true trust funds, whether that's the aviation trust fund or the highway trust fund. Those dollars go in from the taxes that we pay, and they stay in those trust funds to be used for those specific projects. So we want to maintain that. And obviously with the technology and automated vehicles, that's going to be a huge priority for the committee. And the committee has so many other jurisdictions as well. WRDA, we want to make sure we have a WRDA bill, water resources bill, every 2 years, continuing to move forward on that. Huge issue in the United States, inland waterways and the transportation that they provide.
So there's a lot on the plate for whoever becomes the next chairman, and
Absolutely.
Obviously Chairman Schuster has a lot of work to get done next year. Speaking of the next year, you know, we're expecting to have some sort of proposal coming from the White House on infrastructure. I know you've been involved with some of those conversations. You know, what is the what kind of guidance are you getting from the White House right now and from DOT, and what are you expecting to come down the line in 2018?
We're just starting to have conversations with the White House, the administration, on what they want to see in an infrastructure bill. We're working through that. Hopefully we have a meeting scheduled for next week. But we're going through the priorities, you know, how we're going to divide that up, because it's everything. You know, it's highways, bridges, aviation, rail, water systems, sewer systems, you name it, everything out there that's infrastructure. Broadband. So we have to take a look at all of those things. We want to find out how the administration wants to prioritize those things, and then how we pay for it. You know,
well, that's
a
question.
big aspect. Yeah.
Right.
Huge aspect, because the president originally was thinking about public-private partnerships. You know, he's sort of backed away from that a little bit. Everything's on the table. You know, we're back to talking about things like fuel tax, VMT, you know, in terms of the highway trust fund, and we may incorporate it all into this transportation package and use that as our opportunity maybe to pivot. But we're talking right now and going through it, and we're going to tee it up for next year, and that'll be one of the priorities.
Yeah, I think the funding thing is the big question, because there's a lot of concern about how much direct federal investment is there going to be, how much private sector there is, states and localities. The administration has said that they want to also target funds to rural communities and states, and I wonder if you had any thoughts on that in particular, the focus on rural areas.
Absolutely, and again, you know, it's not just things like highways and bridges. When we talk about infrastructure, so many folks think it's just directly targeted towards that. It is. We have a lot of problem in the rural areas with water systems and with sewer systems, waste treatment facilities and that sort of thing. There's going to be a lot of, and rural broadband, which is a real problem. So deployment of those things, that's going to be where a lot of the emphasis on the rural areas is going to be.
Okay. Well, it sounds like there's a lot to look forward to in 2018 and beyond. So I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for speaking with us.
Absolutely.
Okay.